Resident Evil has been terrifying people for nearly 3 decades, and across dozens of games, some have genuinely ruined people's ability to sleep with the lights off, but a few of them go so far beyond what you'd expect that they make the rest of the franchise look like a children's cartoon. Today I'm ranking and explaining the scariest Resident Evil games, and we're starting at the bottom with a game that everyone loves but almost nobody finds terrifying. Resident Evil 4, Original or Remake. Resident Evil 4 is one of the greatest games ever made. It is also, by a comfortable margin, the least scary game on this list. And that's not an insult. That's just what happens when you build a game so focused on making the player feel like an absolute weapon that the horror takes a back seat and never really gets it back. Here's the thing. When RE4 first dropped in 2005, survival horror purists were convinced it was going to destroy the franchise. Capcom had ditched the fixed camera angles, thrown out the slow, methodical pacing, and replaced it all with this brand new over-the-shoulder camera system that basically invented modern third-person shooters. People looked at the gameplay footage and thought, well, Resident Evil is dead, which is, not ideal for a series about things that refuse to stay dead. Turns out, no. Instead of killing the franchise, RE4 became one of the most influential games in history. It sold over 13 million copies across all platforms. It won basically every award that existed at the time. Every third-person action game released after 2005 owes something to this game's camera system. Gears of War, The Last of Us, Dead Space, all of them are standing on RE4's shoulders whether they admit it or not, but here's where it gets complicated for a scariest ranking. RE4 gives you a shotgun, a rifle, grenades, a rocket launcher, and enough roundhouse kicks to make Chuck Norris file a copyright claim. Leon Kennedy doesn't stumble through dark hallways praying he has enough ammo. Leon Kennedy suplexes cultists into the dirt and then shoots their friends. That's not survival horror. That's an action movie where the monsters showed up to the wrong party. The 2023 remake tried to split the difference. Capcom rewrote chunks of the story, completely reworked the level layouts, modernized the controls, and added a knife parry system that lets you deflect incoming attacks with precise timing. Some players loved it. Others argued it made encounters even less threatening, because now you could literally slap a chainsaw out of the air with a kitchen knife. Oh, you're swinging a massive industrial saw at my face? Let me just flick my wrist real quick. I don't know what to tell you. None of this makes RE4 a bad game. It makes it an incredible game that happens to sit at the bottom of a list specifically about terror. You're not scared playing RE4. You're having the time of your life. And that distinction matters because the next entry on this list starts pulling away the power fantasy and replacing it with something much less comfortable. Resident Evil 3, Nemesis Original. Before Resident Evil 3, every enemy in the franchise operated on the same basic principle. You walk into a room, something scary is in the room, you deal with it, you leave. The room is now safe. Resident Evil 3 ripped that contract in half, lit it on fire, and then chased you down the street with a rocket launcher while you watched it burn. Released in September 1999, the game begins the day before the events of Resident Evil 2 and continues through October 1st as Raccoon City collapses around you. But where RE2 gave you a sprawling police station to methodically explore, RE3 gave you something the franchise had never attempted. A single, intelligent enemy designed to hunt you across the entire game. The Nemesis T-Type was engineered by Umbrella's European branch with one job: kill every surviving STARS member. And unlike the shambling zombies or even the tyrants before it, Nemesis could run. It could use weapons. It carried a rocket launcher. It could follow you through doors. That last part is the one that broke people. In previous games, a door was a loading screen, sure, but it was also a psychological safe zone. You go through a door, you get a moment to breathe. Nemesis didn't care about your moment. Nemesis had places to be. Here's where it gets interesting though. The game was noticeably shorter than RE1 or RE2. Capcom traded breadth for intensity, and the result was a game that felt less like exploration and more like one continuous chase scene. Every hallway could become a death sentence. You weren't solving a mystery anymore, you were surviving a pursuit. And there's a genuine community debate about whether the original PS1 Nemesis is actually scarier than his modern remake counterpart. The 1999 version had cruder AI, obviously, but that lack of sophistication made him unpredictable in ways the polished 2020 version never replicated. He'd show up in places that felt random. Sometimes he'd appear in a room you'd cleared 10 minutes ago. Sometimes he wouldn't show up at all, which was almost worse, because then you were just waiting. The remake Nemesis is objectively more agile. He grabs you with tentacles, leaps across rooftops, makes tactical decisions. He's a better designed enemy in every measurable way. But better designed doesn't always mean scarier. Sometimes a janky PS1 AI stumbling through a doorway at the worst possible moment hits different than a carefully choreographed set piece. Jill Valentine's story also added something the series hadn't explored yet. During the game, she gets infected with the T-virus, and Carlos has to obtain a vaccine to save her. You weren't just running from Nemesis, you were running on borrowed time. This is the game that proved a single enemy could carry an entire horror experience. No elaborate puzzle box mansion, no sprawling underground lab, just one relentless thing that wanted you dead, and a city falling apart around you. But if Nemesis taught us that one pursuer could define a game, the next entry on this list taught us that an entire mansion could be the enemy itself. Resident Evil 2002 Remake. Every survival horror game before 2002 taught you the same lesson. Ammo is precious, so run past enemies whenever you can. The Resident Evil Remake took that lesson, nodded politely, and then punished you for following it. Released exclusively on the Nintendo GameCube, this wasn't some lazy graphical upscale. Capcom rebuilt the entire game from the ground up, with redesigned mechanics, new puzzles, additional explorable areas, and new story content including the tragic Lisa Trevor subplot. It was by every measurable standard a better game than the original. But the single edition that changed everything wasn't a new area or a cutscene. It was the Crimson Heads. Here's how they work. You shoot a zombie, it drops. You step over the body and keep moving because that's what Resident Evil trained you to do for years. But if you don't burn that corpse or destroy the head completely, the zombie doesn't stay dead. It mutates. The skin turns red, the claws come out, and it gets back up faster, more aggressive, and significantly harder to kill. They're dramatically tougher than standard zombies and fast enough to sprint at you like they're late for something. A regular zombie shuffles and goes down with a few handgun rounds. A Crimson Head will eat those rounds for breakfast and close the distance before you can even line up a second shot, and the reanimation timer is what really gets you. Leave a body on the ground long enough without burning it and it will come back. The exact window varies, but the point is that every corpse you walk past is now on a countdown. You've been backtracking through the same hallways for the last hour, and every single zombie you left on the ground is a ticking time bomb. This is the genius of it. The game turned your own survival instincts against you. Conserve ammo? Great. Now you've got a mansion full of sleeping Crimson Heads. Use your ammo to kill everything properly? Cool. Now you have 0 bullets for the actual boss encounters. Burn the bodies with kerosene? Sure, except kerosene is almost as scarce as the ammo itself. Every single encounter becomes a risk assessment. Every zombie on the floor is a decision you made that might come back to literally bite your face off. The community still argues about whether Crimson Heads are the scariest zombie variant in franchise history or just an unfair difficulty spike that punishes new players who don't understand the system. And honestly, both sides have a point. If you know the mechanic, it's one of the most brilliantly tense resource management systems ever designed. If you don't know the mechanic, you're just a person having a very bad time in a mansion, full of things that refuse to stay dead. The GameCube exclusivity also meant that a massive chunk of the player base couldn't even touch this game for years. It sat there on a console most horror fans didn't own, building a reputation as the definitive survival horror experience that most people had only heard about. By the time the HD remaster hit other platforms in 2015, the mystique was already cemented. This is the game that proved a remake could genuinely surpass the original, not by adding more explosions or bigger set pieces, but by introducing a single mechanic that fundamentally altered how you approach every room, every hallway, every corpse on the ground. But if you think a zombie that gets back up is scary, wait until you meet an enemy that never stops chasing you in the first place. Resident Evil Village RE8. Resident Evil Village shipped over 3 million copies in its first few days. It scored an 84 on Metacritic. It brought back Ethan Winters for a direct sequel to RE7 that kept the first-person perspective and doubled down on everything that made that game work. And yet, if you ask most people what they remember about Village, they'll say tall vampire lady, which is, not ideal for a horror game. Let me explain. The setup is genuinely compelling. Ethan's living a quiet life with his wife Mia and their daughter Rosemary when Chris Redfield shows up and essentially destroys everything. Rose gets kidnapped, Ethan ends up stranded in a remote European village overrun by lichens, and the whole thing spirals into a desperate rescue mission across multiple distinct zones. A Gothic castle, a decrepit reservoir, an industrial factory. Each one controlled by a different lord, each with their own flavor of nightmare. And here's where Village does something genuinely clever. It's structured less like a traditional Resident Evil game and more like a horror anthology. Every zone is basically its own self-contained subgenre. Castle Dimitrescu is gothic vampire horror. The Reservoir is creature feature swamp terror. Heisenberg's Factory is industrial body horror with mechanical abominations. You're essentially playing 4 different horror games stitched together by the Village hub, and the tonal variety keeps you completely off balance. But here's where it gets complicated. Lady Dimitrescu, the 9'6" vampire who runs the castle, became one of the most iconic characters in franchise history before the game even launched. She generated more memes in a single marketing cycle than most characters generate in a decade. Great for sales, terrible for horror credibility. It's hard to be scared of something the entire internet has a crush on, and that tension defines the whole Village experience. Because buried inside this game, sandwiched between action-heavy Lycan encounters and the Dimitrescu thirst marketing, is House Beneviento. If you haven't played it, House Beneviento is widely considered one of the scariest sequences in the entire Resident Evil franchise. Your weapons get taken away. You're alone in a dark house solving puzzles. And then a giant mutant baby starts chasing you through a basement, making sounds no human being should ever have to hear. Pure psychological horror, zero combat, maximum dread. The kind of sequence that makes you pause the game and go sit in a well-lit room for a while. The problem is that Village can't decide what it wants to be. RE7 made Ethan feel genuinely vulnerable. He was a regular guy stumbling through a nightmare with a flashlight and whatever scraps he could find. Village Ethan is basically an action hero. He's crafting pipe bombs, suplexing Lycans, and shrugging off injuries that would kill a normal person several times over. The vulnerability that made RE7's horror work gets traded for competence, and competence is the enemy of fear. The community is split right down the middle. Some players argue Village represents the natural evolution of RE7's formula, that the expanded scope makes it a better overall game even if individual moments are less terrifying. Others say it's the exact same mistake the franchise made after RE4, where commercial success slowly eroded the horror foundation until you ended up with RE6, which nobody wants again. Here's the thing though, when Village commits to being scary, it's absolutely terrifying. House Beneviento alone earns this game a spot on any horror ranking. The Lycan ambushes in the opening section are genuinely frantic. Even Castle Dimitrescu has moments of real tension when you're being stalked through narrow corridors by the daughters, who dissolve into swarms of flies and reform behind you. But if you think a game that can't fully commit to its own horror identity is frustrating, wait until you see what happens when Resident Evil goes all in on action and completely forgets what franchise it belongs to. Resident Evil 2 Remake, January 25th, 2019. Capcom drops the Resident Evil 2 remake, and it proceeds to ship over 12 million copies, making it one of Capcom's best-selling games ever. A pure survival horror game sitting alongside the most commercially successful titles the company has ever produced. That alone tells you something important about what this game did right. But let's talk about the real star of the show, Mr. X. In the original 1998 Resident Evil 2, the Tyrant was basically a cameo. He showed up a handful of times. You dealt with him, and that was that. The remake took this relatively minor antagonist and turned him into a 7-foot-tall, trench coat-wearing nightmare that follows you through the Raccoon City Police Department like he's got a personal vendetta against your continued existence, which, to be fair, he does. Here's the thing that makes Mr. X work so well. You hear him before you see him. Those heavy, deliberate footsteps echoing through the hallways above you, beside you, getting closer. That audio-first approach to terror is genuinely brilliant. You're solving a puzzle in some back office, and you hear those boots thudding on the floor one room over. Your brain immediately stops caring about the puzzle. Your brain starts calculating escape routes. The sound design alone turned a police station into one of the most anxiety-inducing environments in modern horror gaming, and the community still can't agree on whether you can actually outsmart him. Some players swear they figured out reliable tricks to manipulate his pathing. Others insist his AI is sophisticated enough that he adapts, that he learns your patterns and cuts you off. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, but the fact that nobody can definitively say, here's how you beat his system, means Capcom did their job. Uncertainty is scarier than any jump scare, But Mr. X isn't even the only problem. The zombies in this remake are completely different creatures compared to their 1998 counterparts. The originals were stiff, slow, and honestly pretty easy to walk around. You could juke a zombie in the original RE2 like you were playing flag football against a toddler. Not anymore. These redesigned zombies lunge at you. They grab you. They take an absurd amount of punishment before they go down, and even then, you're never fully confident they're actually dead. Shoot one in the head 6 times and it drops. Walk past it 3 minutes later and suddenly it's grabbing your ankle. They coordinate in groups too, funneling through doorways and cutting off retreat paths in ways that feel disturbingly intentional. Oh, you wanted to go back the way you came? That's cute. There are 4 of us now. This is what makes the Resident Evil 2 remake a pressure cooker. It's not just Mr. X, it's not just the zombies. It's both simultaneously. All the time, you're trying to navigate a building full of enemies that refuse to die while a relentless bioweapon stalks you from room to room. There is zero downtime. Every hallway is a risk assessment. Every door you open could have 3 zombies behind it, and Mr. X could be 30 seconds behind you. The pursuit mechanic that Capcom perfected here basically became the template for modern horror game antagonist design. Sustained anxiety over cheap scares. That constant low-level dread of knowing something is always coming, always getting closer, and you can never fully relax. Games have been copying this formula ever since, and honestly, most of them don't do it half as well. Over 12 million copies sold proves something the industry kept questioning for years. Pure survival horror, no action hero power fantasy, no machine guns and roundhouse kicks, just you, limited ammo, and things that want you dead can absolutely achieve blockbuster commercial success. You don't need to compromise the horror to sell copies, you just need to make the horror good enough. But if you think a relentless tyrant stalking you through a police station is bad, wait until you meet his older, angrier, rocket launcher wielding cousin. Resident Evil 3 Remake. If Mr. X from the RE2 remake made you feel hunted, Nemesis makes you feel like prey that's already been tagged, tracked, and scheduled for elimination. Because that's basically what's happening. The Resident Evil 3 remake took the original 1999 Nemesis and turned him from a big, scary guy who chased you down hallways into something significantly worse. A bioweapon that actually thinks about how it's going to kill you. Let me explain. The original Nemesis was terrifying for a very specific reason. His AI was unpredictable. You never really knew when he'd show up, and on PS1 hardware, that jank worked in the game's favor. He'd appear in rooms you didn't expect, fire a rocket launcher at your face, and generally ruin whatever plan you thought you had. The fear came from chaos. You couldn't predict him because, honestly, the game could barely predict him. The remake Nemesis is a completely different animal. Capcom built him as a Nemesis T-type, a parasitically enhanced tyrant designed to hunt down specific targets, and they committed to that concept fully. This version is faster, smarter, and disturbingly more capable than anything the original could manage. He uses his tentacles to grab Jill from distances that feel fundamentally unfair. He can leap across entire streets in a single bound, and he uses weapons tactically, not just swinging them around like a maniac, but actually making decisions about positioning and timing. He's not chasing you, he's cornering you. There's a difference, and your heart rate knows it. Think about what Mr. X does in the RE2 remake. He walks, he follows sounds, he punches through walls occasionally. Scary, absolutely. But Nemesis takes that concept and straps a rocket launcher to it, gives it tentacles, teaches it parkour, and tells it to go find Jill Valentine specifically. Mr. X is a hammer. Nemesis is a guided missile with a grudge. The game follows Jill Valentine and Carlos Oliveira as they try to escape Raccoon City, while simultaneously hunting for a vaccine to the T-virus, which is a pretty ambitious to-do list when a bioweapon is actively trying to separate your head from your shoulders. Every encounter with Nemesis feels like a boss fight you didn't sign up for. You're running through a street, thinking about ammo management, and suddenly there's a tentacle around your ankle and you're being dragged towards something that makes tactical decisions about murder, which is, not ideal. The community still argues about which Nemesis is scarier. Traditionalists swear by the original. They'll tell you the PS1 version's raw unpredictability created a kind of fear that polished modern AI can't replicate, and they're not entirely wrong. There's something uniquely unsettling about an enemy that doesn't follow rules you can learn. But modern players push back hard. The remake Nemesis demonstrates higher order intelligence. He adapts. He learns. He doesn't just stumble into you, he actively problem solves his way to your location. The original scared you because you didn't know what it would do. The remake scares you because it knows exactly what it's doing. The thing shipped 2 million copies in its first 5 days. days. By early 2025, it had crossed 9 million copies sold worldwide. Those aren't numbers you hit with a bad redesign. Whatever Capcom did to Nemesis, it worked. They took a straightforward pursuer and rebuilt him into an intelligent bioweapon with adaptability and learning-based behavior, and the market responded accordingly. Here's the thing about Nemesis that doesn't get discussed enough. He represents one of the most successful antagonist redesigns in franchise history. Plenty of remakes try to modernize their villains and end up making them less threatening. Smoother graphics, cleaner animations, but somehow less scary. The RE3 remake pulled off the opposite. Every new ability they gave Nemesis made him more terrifying, not less. The tentacle grabs, the long-distance jumps, the weapon tactics, each one adds another layer of, I am in genuine danger and this creature is smarter than me. But if Nemesis is what happens when Capcom perfects a pursuer, wait until you see what happens when they throw out the rulebook entirely and build a horror game from scratch in first person. Resident Evil Requiem RE9. This one hasn't even come out yet, and it's already keeping people up at night. Resident Evil Requiem was officially announced at a PlayStation State of Play in 2025 with a release date of 2026, launching on PS5 and PC. And based on everything Capcom has shown so far, this might be the most narratively ambitious entry the franchise has ever attempted. Here's the setup. You play as Grace Ashcroft, an FBI intelligence analyst investigating a string of mysterious deaths at a place called the Wrenwood Hotel. Sounds like standard Resident Evil fare, until you learn that Grace's mother was murdered at that exact hotel 8 years prior. So this isn't just a professional assignment. It's personal. Grace is walking into the building where her life fell apart, armed with a badge and whatever courage she has left. The Wrenwood Hotel as a setting already signals a return to claustrophobic, location-based horror. One building, one nightmare, nowhere to run. But here's where it gets really interesting. Grace isn't just some new character Capcom invented out of thin air. She's the daughter of Alyssa Ashcroft, a journalist who survived the 1998 Raccoon City destruction incident. And if that name sounds familiar, it should, because Alyssa was a playable character in Resident Evil, Outbreak and Outbreak File 2. Those games came out over 20 years ago. Capcom is reaching back into the deep lore vault and pulling out a connection that spans decades of franchise history. That's not fan service. That's franchise archaeology. The community lost its collective mind when this connection was revealed. Outbreak fans have been starved for acknowledgement for literally decades, and suddenly their favorite spin-off characters are getting direct narrative continuation in a mainline caliber title. Naturally, the speculation machine kicked into overdrive. If Alyssa Ashcroft's daughter is the protagonist, could other Outbreak survivors show up? Could we see Kevin Ryman, Mark Wilkins? Nobody knows, but the fact that the door is even open has people combing through every frame of every trailer like they're looking for evidence at a crime scene. And then there's Leon. Leon S. Kennedy returns as a veteran agent dispatched to investigate alongside Grace. Let that sink in. The rookie cop who stumbled into the Raccoon City Police Department in 1998 is now a grizzled operative in his 50s. He's been through Raccoon City, Spain, the Eastern Slav Republic, and whatever else Capcom has thrown at him over the years. The man has seen things that would break most people, and now he's being paired with the daughter of a Raccoon City survivor to investigate a haunted hotel. There's something poetic about that. The old guard meeting the new generation, both connected to the same catastrophe that started everything. Capcom has been very deliberate about positioning Requiem as a significant entry in terms of plot. This isn't a throwaway side story. This isn't a spin-off. This is meant to carry real narrative weight, distinguishing it from the Winters family duology of RE7 and Village. That's a bold statement. It tells you Capcom sees Requiem as a turning point, a bridge between the original Raccoon City saga and wherever the franchise goes next. The Wrenwood Hotel setting, combined with Grace's personal trauma, suggests Capcom is leaning hard into psychological horror territory. A protagonist investigating her mother's murder in the exact location where it happened? That's not just survival horror. That's emotional horror. The kind that gets under your skin because the stakes aren't just don't get eaten by a zombie. They're confront the worst thing that ever happened to you and try not to fall apart. We obviously can't rank what we haven't played yet, but everything about Requiem's setup, the isolated hotel, the personal stakes, the deep franchise connections, the return of an aging Leon Kennedy, points towards something that could redefine what Resident Evil horror looks like going forward. 2026 cannot come fast enough, but if you want to talk about the game that already redefined Resident Evil horror and arguably saved the entire franchise from itself, we need to talk about the one that started the modern era. Resident Evil 7, Biohazard. This is the game that saved Resident Evil, and I don't say that lightly. By 2016, 2017, the franchise was in trouble. Resident Evil 5 had leaned into co-op action. Resident Evil 6 had leaned even harder, to the point where it barely resembled a horror game anymore. The series that popularized survival horror was slowly becoming a third-person shooter with zombies in it. Fans were frustrated, critics were skeptical, and the general consensus was that Capcom had lost the plot. Literally. Then Resident Evil 7 dropped on January 24th, 2017, and changed everything. The first thing you notice is the perspective. This is the first mainline Resident Evil game played entirely in first person. No over-the-shoulder camera, no wide third-person view, giving you comfortable spatial awareness. Just you, your hands, and whatever nightmare is standing 3 feet in front of your face. When the game was announced, the community lost its mind, and not in a good way. People thought Capcom was chasing trends, trying to copy Outlast or Amnesia. Turns out, no. What they actually did was force an intimacy with the horror that no previous entry had ever achieved. Here's why it works. In third person, you can see around corners. You have peripheral awareness that, even subconsciously, makes you feel safer. First person strips all of that away. When you're walking down a hallway in the Baker estate and you hear a floorboard creak behind you, you have to physically turn around to see what made that sound. And sometimes nothing's there. Sometimes something is. The setting is a masterclass in restraint. Forget the corporate bioweapon labs. Forget the sprawling European villages. Resident Evil 7 takes place in a single derelict plantation house in Dulvey, Louisiana. You play as Ethan Winters, a regular guy searching for his wife Mia, who sent him a message after being missing for 3 years. That's it. No military training, no special forces background. Just a man walking into a house he should absolutely not be walking into. And the house belongs to the Bakers. Jack, Marguerite, Lucas, and their family are some of the most disturbing antagonists in the entire franchise. Jack Baker in particular stalks you through the estate with the energy of a man who's been waiting for company and is very, very excited you showed up. He crashes through walls, he shows up in rooms you thought were safe. The combat against him feels deliberately stiff and awkward, which some players found frustrating, but here's the thing. That's the point. You're not Leon Kennedy. You're a guy with a handgun and zero training, and the game wants you to feel every ounce of that vulnerability. But the real star of Resident Evil 7 isn't Jack. It isn't the molded, those fungal humanoid creatures that lurk in the house like sentient mold given legs and a bad attitude. It's the sound design. Long stretches of this game have zero music. Nothing. Just silence, punctuated by creaking wood, distant footsteps, dripping water, and the occasional sound you can't identify that makes your brain light up like a fire alarm. Most horror games use music to tell you when to be scared. Resident Evil 7 removes the music entirely and lets your own imagination do the work. You're walking through a pitch black hallway hearing nothing but your own breathing and the house settling around you, and every single sound becomes a potential threat. It is, without exaggeration, some of the most effective audio design in the entire franchise. The game shipped over 10 million units and proved definitively that players wanted Resident Evil to be scary again. Not action-packed, not co-op friendly, scary. The first-person perspective that everyone doubted became the foundation for Village and the template for the franchise's future. Resident Evil 7 didn't just return the franchise to its survival horror roots, it replanted them, watered them, and grew something that might be the scariest entry the series has ever produced. One derelict house in Louisiana brought it all back. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.